Hey guys, Will Mahan here for We Make Game with another Photoshop tutorial. And once again, this tutorial is done in Windows, but if you're on a Mac, you can still follow along by remembering that almost always Control is interchangeable with Command and Alt is interchangeable with Option. Now, today's tutorial will cover how to make a glossy button like this one that can be used in web pages, program interfaces, or video games, and we're going to do it in less than 20 minutes. Now, if you're a graphic designer, the amount of time it takes you to make a button may not be all that important because time spent designing is always fun. However, if you are not a graphic designer, you probably just want something decent that you can get done, drop into your project, and move on with your life. Now that's what this tutorial is all about. Now we are going to be moving along fairly quickly since the whole point of this is speed and ease, so if at any time you feel like you need a greater explanation as to why something works the way it does, feel free to post a question in the comments and I'll answer them there. Now we're going to break this up into two separate parts. The first part will be creating the art assets. The second part will be constructing the button and then launching it in an application so you can actually see it at work. Let's go ahead and start with part one. First, go to File, New, and I like to work big, so let's start at 1024 by 1024 at 100 resolution, and let's give this a name of Glossy Green Button. Hit OK. Now first, let's rename this layer to Outer Trim, and we need to reset our foreground and background colors by clicking here or hitting the D key on your keyboard. Next, we want to pick up the elliptical marquee tool, and we want to start in the upper left corner and drag down towards the lower right, holding shift as you do so that that circle will remain nice and round. Now after you've got that, go ahead and pick up your gradient tool. Now go up to the gradient presets and choose foreground to background and select linear gradient. Now starting at the bottom, drag straight up, holding shift as you do to lock it at 90 degrees and drop it right there at the top of the selection. Now go ahead and hit Control D to clear that selection. Now double click on the layer to open up the layer style window and select stroke. Select the fill type to gradient and set your angle at -90 degrees. Hit OK to lock in those changes. Next, you want to duplicate this layer by holding down Alt and dragging straight up and dropping it right there. Rename this layer to Inner Trim. I want to resize this slightly, so pick up the Move tool, and while dragging in towards the middle on the corner transform, hold down Shift and Alt to lock the constraints and set it to about that size right there. Before we commit, we need to rotate it 180 degrees, holding shift as we do to lock it at 15-degree increments. Go ahead and commit those changes by hitting the checkbox. Now let's duplicate this layer by holding down Alt and dragging straight up, and name this layer Button Up. Now let's resize this one real fast. Grab the corner transform and pull in towards the middle. Hold down Shift and Alt as you do, and set it about right there. Lock in the changes. Now go ahead and lock the transparency on this layer, and now it's time to choose the color for our button. First, let's swap the foreground and background colors so that white is in the front, and then pick your color. For this example, I'll be choosing pure green cyan. Now go back to the gradient tool and leave it set foreground to background, but this time choose radial gradient. Now starting in the middle and just slightly above, drag straight down and hold shift as you do to lock it at 90 degrees and drop it right there. Now next, we want to go ahead and duplicate this layer. If you'll remember, this is a button and we like our buttons to be animated. In order to animate a button, we need a separate image for each state of the animation. So while holding down Alt, let's drag this layer down this time so that it is below the original layer, and rename this one to Button Over. Now on this one here, we want to first hide the visibility on the Button Up layer by clicking the eye here, and double click on the Button Over layer to pull up the Layer Style menu. Go to Inner Glow. First, change the color to match the color of your button by clicking on the foreground with your eyedropper tool. Click OK. Now change the size all the way up to 250 and change the blend mode to normal and hit OK. Now we want to duplicate this layer again by holding down Alt and dragging down, move this one below the button over layer and rename this one to button down. I'll turn on its visibility by clicking here, turn the visibility off to this layer by clicking here. Now pick up your move tool again and rotate this around 180 degrees, holding shift as you do to lock it at 15-degree increments, and commit the changes. Next we want to create the highlights for the button. Do that by first creating a new layer, rename this one Hotspot 1. Pick up your elliptical marquee tool again, and starting in the middle, drag towards the upper left corner, holding shift as you do to maintain symmetry, and drop it about right there. Now pick up your gradient tool again, this time changing the preset to foreground to transparent, leave it at radial, and reset your foreground and background swatches by clicking here and then click here to swap them so that white is again in the front. Now starting in the middle of your selection, drag out to the edge. Now don't go beyond the edges of selection, because if you do, you'll end up with a really hard edge and it just won't look right. Hit Control D to clear your selection box. Pick up the move tool. Now we want to duplicate this layer by holding Alt and dragging and relocate it to about here. Hold down Shift and Alt to resize, and then grab the middle transform and squish it just a little bit. Free rotate it so that it matches the contour of the trim, and relocate it about right there. Commit those changes. Duplicate this layer again by holding down Alt and dragging it to about here. Resize by holding Shift and Alt as you drag on the transform, and rotate it around so that the contour roughly matches the trim. Commit those changes. Now let's rename this layer to Hotspot 2. Rename this one to Hotspot 3. Now one last thing to do while the Hotspot 3 layer is active, hold down Shift and click on Hotspot 1 so that all three of those layers are selected. Now let's duplicate them all at one time by holding Alt and dragging up and dropping it. Let's turn the visibility off to these for now and resize all three of these layers as a group by holding Shift and Alt, dragging in from the corner about right there. Now let's relocate it to about that area there so it's just slightly offset. Commit those changes. And that's going to do it for the art assets. Next, let's go ahead and save the file. Choose a destination folder. Now if you named it when we created the file, this should already be filled in. If not, go ahead and do that now and click Save. Now that's going to do it for the art. Stay tuned for part 2 when we construct the button and drop it into an application so you can see it at work. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.